to interrupt this conversation. It's kind of nice. I feel like I should just let you go on like this for the next couple hours. We might learn more out of all three of you that way, but that being said, good evening and welcome to the Timberlane Public Forum. We're here with the three finalists for the position of Superintendent of Schools for SAU 106. I'm Kristen Savage. I'm the Vice Chair of the Timberlane Regional School Board. I'm joined by Sandra Allaire. She is the Director of Curriculum and Professional Learning for the district, and she's also my co-chair on the Superintendent Search Committee. Sandy and I will serve as the moderators of this event. Before we begin, if I can bear with me while I take a moment just to read the following statement. As Vice Chair of the Timberlane Regional School Board, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the Governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the Governor's Emergency Order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting, providing public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting, as we previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting through notifications, email notices, and postings on the Timberlane Regional School District websites, including but not limited to timberlane.net. We are also providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there's a problem with access. If anybody has a problem, please contact 382-6541 extension 3955. This is a public forum and no action or votes will be taken. I am the only school board member participating virtually. The attendance of the other board members who are observing with the public will be so noted. And now I am going to hand this over to my co-chair, Sandy Allaire.
Thank you, Kristen, and good evening, everyone. We are happy to be joined this evening by our three final candidates for the position of Superintendent of Schools for the Timberlane Regional School District, which will be SAU 106. Dr. Brian Cochran, Mr. Reuben Duncan, and Mr. Christopher Kellen. These three educators and leaders rose to the top of a candidate pool of 20 applicants through an extensive search process conducted by our 12-member search committee. All questions for the forum this evening were submitted and ranked by individuals from various stakeholder groups across our 4 towns, including students, staff, parents, and other community members. Our search committee met yesterday to review all submissions, narrow down the question pool, and determine the order of questions for this evening. All 3 candidates will have an opportunity to answer all questions that are asked this evening in a rotating manner. Names were drawn at random to determine the order in which candidates will speak this evening. Dr. Cochran will answer question number 1 first, followed by Mr. Kellen and Mr. Duncan. Mr. Kellen will then reply to question number 2 first, followed by Mr. Duncan and Dr. Cochran. Finally, Mr. Duncan will answer question number 3 first, followed by Dr. Cochran and Mr. Kellen. We will follow the same rotation throughout the evening for all questions. We have also allocated time limits for each question. I will announce these time limits prior to asking each question. In the interest of time, we plan to ask each question 1 time only. However, we encourage candidates to ask us to repeat any question whenever necessary. Kristen will serve as the timekeeper this evening. She will alert each candidate 30 seconds prior to the end of their allotted time by sounding this tone. Before moving forward, we want to assure that all 3 of you heard the sound clearly. Can signify with a thumbs up. Perfect. When you hear the tone, this will be a signal that we hope will not be too interruptive, that you have 30 seconds remaining and should strive to wrap up your response. Kristen will verbally announce when your response time is up. We encourage all candidates to leave your cameras on during the forum, but to mute yourselves when you are not speaking. We do plan to take a short 3-minute break sometime after 8 p.m. this evening. At that time, all candidates are invited to turn their cameras off if they need to take a short break, stretch your legs, get some water, whatever you need to do. So now that we've gone over the general format this evening, we're going to move on to our first question. This first question is more of a question prompt, and we've allocated 3 minutes for each candidate. And once again, we will begin with Dr. Cochran. Dr. Cochran, please introduce yourself and tell us what about Timberlane appeals to you.
Well, Sandy, I've worked in school districts with a variety of sizes and schools and a variety of sizes. The smallest school I ever taught in was 350 students. The largest was 2,000. And the smallest district I've been an administrator in was 300, and the largest was 55,000 students. One of the things that I like about Timberlane is that it's large enough to be complex, vibrant, challenging, while still being small enough that you'll be able to get in the schools, and I'm able to meet the people and work with leadership and folks in the district. I like to get to know the people in the districts that I'm working in, and to me, that's one of the draws. It's large enough to have that complexity and use the skill set that I have in my background, and yet small enough that I can get to know people and work with them. The other thing is I think that the needs of the district align very well with my background and experience. I think therefore that makes it an interesting challenge for me. I've learned a lot about Timberlane since I've been here in an interim capacity, and also in the consulting before that, but I have much more to learn. And specifically, I'd love to get more involved in the community with COVID and for other reasons I haven't had the opportunity. But I find the community members very passionate about their school. They care about their families and their kids, and they're very supportive. So for those reasons, I think it's a great place for me for the next 3 years. So.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen, we'll ask the same question of you.
Great. Well, I've been an educator for nearly 30 years, 26 of which have been with the Derry Cooperative School District, which is the third largest school district in the state. I began my career in education as a co-op student while attending Northeastern University. At that time, I was a one-to-one paraprofessional and a classroom assistant in a residential placement for students with significant behavioral disorders, psychiatric disorders, and intellectual disabilities. I then became the behavior specialist assistant there. After graduation, I returned home to Salem. I started working as a children's mental health clinician at CLM Behavioral Health Systems, also known as Center for Life Management. A year later, I was recruited by the Derry Cooperative School District to serve as their counselor for students with emotional disturbance. I had a great time doing that for 2 years. And just those 2 years later, at 27, I became the Director of Student Services, and I remained in that position for 19 years. I became Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, taking on additional elements of the school district from 2016 to 2018. And since 2018, I've been Assistant Superintendent of Schools. The biggest reason why I want to be the superintendent in Timberlane is pretty simple. My family, which includes my wife, Carrie, my son, Nicholas, and my daughter, Olivia, we live in Atkinson. In March, it will mark 18 years of living here in the Timberlane community. We're a proud Timberlane School District family. My kids have attended schools here since kindergarten. Amazingly now, Nick is now a junior at the high school. Olivia's in 8th grade at the middle school. And we truly love this community. We've made lots of great connections and established some wonderful relationships with many members of the communities in all 4 towns through participation in a variety of community activities and events. I've coached sports here. I've seen so many of our community members' kids grow up from 4 or 5 years old, and now, I'm seeing them in the papers with their successes in high school. And it's just the place that I would like to be part of the fabric of the educational community.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Kellen. And Mr. Duncan.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this portion of the search process. It's really an honor. And I have been in education for over 20 years, all in New Hampshire. I started off as a math teacher at the high school, not far from here on the seacoast over in Exeter. And I moved across the state to the southwestern side, and that's where I've been the rest of my time as an assistant principal, a principal, an assistant superintendent, and right now a superintendent. And so what attracted me to Timberlane in the school district was maybe not what would attract everyone, but there was a element that was part of the advertisement that said that we were really looking for someone to help with developing a vision, helping maybe institute a change process to help the district move in a specific direction for a sustainable amount of time and into the future. And also that coupled with, after reading a little bit more about the district and you know, even today, SAU 106, it talks about some changes that are already going on, and when there's change already going on, it's a great time to be able to enter an organization, be able to help people dream about what is possible. And so I enjoy the change process. I understand the change process very well. The time that it takes, the very careful elements to it. And so Timberlane has a lot to work with, has a lot of great elements, is doing a lot of good things. Putting it all together and really doing what's best for our kids in this community is really what excites me. On a personal note, I do have some connection to the region, more than just living on the coast for you know, the majority of my upbringing. My grandparents and great-grandparents lived not far from the school, and I spent a lot of time in the area, playing in the fields and in the woods, and just kind of getting to experience some really great memories. My grandmother and my mother both actually attended the Pollard School when they were younger. They didn't, high school, Timberlane High School didn't exist. I think my mother went to Haverhill High at the time, but so there's some sentimentalness there for me with this particular district, as well as I have a lot of family in the area close by.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. We'll move on to question number 2. And so following our rotational order, Mr. Kellen, this is going to you first. So this question is also a 4-minute question with regard to time limits. So Mr. Kellen, cite specific examples. What is one thing that you learned from each step in your career that has contributed to the educator and leader that you have become today?
Okay. I think the one thing overall that I've learned is it's all about students. Everything that we do, students have to be at the center of it. And as part of that, the connection with the greater educational community. So how we connect to those students, to their families. How do we support our staff so that they're able to meet the needs of all of their students and the diverse learning needs of so many, as we know about now. So at every step in my career, I've seen that, you know, that very same thing. Of course, with my experience in special education, it's always been about individual learning. And in fact, you know, I really believe that general education, I'll use the bunny quotes, is really moving towards special education in a lot of ways. Everything that we do now is much more individualized for our students. It's about meeting the diverse learning needs of all of those students, individually and collectively. And that poses a set of challenges. But when we return to that focus of students at the center and looking at the greater community around them, we recognize that we're making those decisions about those students and providing what they need, and then expanding it to the collective greater number of students together. All students can benefit from those kinds of approaches. So keeping students at the center and supporting the rest of the educational community is a thing that I've learned to be the most important element of providing education to students. And in doing that, we have to provide great communication across all of those stakeholders.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kellen. We'll ask the same question, again, 4 minutes. Mr. Duncan.
So I've been very fortunate to have some really wonderful mentors in my life. And so when I started off as a teacher at the Exeter High School, I just had a marvelous department chair who took me under her wing and really guided me. She was there to answer questions, to be able to helped me lesson plan. And she also gave me the opportunity to create, and she gave me some leeway, and she gave me a lot of those experiences or opportunities to have those types of experiences. And you learn a lot, both through mistakes and also just through some successes, when you're given the leeway to do that. Similarly, when I became an assistant principal over at the Hillsborough Deering Middle School, I was blessed with having a principal who had been in education for 30 years, a principal for 20 years, and was creative and was believed that the most important thing is what we focused on each and every individual child. And so that started to help me form my belief system that I have right now. And I can say similar to what Mr. Kellen said, I believe everything he said. It. Students have to be at the center, and I make my decisions in an uncompromisingly student-centered way. The opportunities I had as a principal to be able to lead change, both working with a local college to help them with their teacher education program, while at the same time developing some great systems for our own school. And then as a superintendent right now, being able to lead a community and developing a strategic design that's different than a strategic plan, but a strategic design that really talks about the what we want from our community, what we want from our students, what we want from our school. And then taking the time after that to develop a plan that is going to be able to carry the district on in the future. And so I've had just really wonderful experiences that have shaped what I really do in education. And again, it is, as was stated before, all about each and every child.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran, please, the same question.
If I had to cover every position I've been in my career, I'd run out of time. But let me talk about the first 20 years of experience in which I was a physical education teacher, health teacher, coach, and also taught high school and middle school science and also high school math. During that period, I really worked very hard at my craft. I remember thinking that in reality, I had multiple bosses. I had a principal who I reported to and who was my boss, but I also felt I owed an obligation to my students and to my parents. I worked hard with them. I communicated well with my parents, made sure that I got connected with them if the students were struggling. And from that, I realized a couple of things. One is the importance of building that connection with students and following it over time, following up with students, with parents rather, than making sure they're in the loop and aware of any concerns with their children. And also the importance of that connection in the classroom. Across all of those subjects and all of those grade levels and all of those years, it came to me that being a teacher is far more than teaching and learning. It's about relationships and building those relationships over time in a network as well as individually. The second stage of my career really had multiple positions that were related to curriculum instruction, assessment, school improvement. I had the chance to do some fabulous work. I was a lead curriculum writer for curriculum guides for the province of Nova Scotia, which is about 120-some thousand students at that point in time. I also led some work for the Atlantic provinces, which have been over 250,000 students. I got to consult on textbooks. I got to take part in some phenomenal professional development. I had the ability, after I left the Department of Education, to consult in multiple ways. Here in New Hampshire, I've consulted with Intelitech USA on the robotics engineering curriculum. I was a curriculum development person and the curriculum lead on that project. And I was the first project director for the Skills USA Skills Connect assessments. So I have broad and deep experience across all of that technical language, all of that technical experience. And then the last piece really has been leadership the last 13 years, district administration as assistant superintendent in Nashua, leading our work in competencies, and then to Litchfield, and then Barnstead, and now Timberlane. In all my previous places, we've seen significant improvement in academic scores and academic achievement, and other things. And so that's more been the third stage, which is strategic planning, engaging the community, working with stakeholders, putting programs into place, and utilizing that skill set from that middle range curriculum instruction assessment to focus on school improvement and improving student learning.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. We'll move on to question 3. And so this will be Mr. Duncan, you will start first. This is a 4-minute question again. And so this question is with regard to the experience that we have all gone through this past year during the pandemic. So specifically, how will you assess the learning loss of students after the pandemic, and how will you address it?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, first and foremost, we're going through a very difficult time. Obviously, every school is, working to get in person. Has the, there are times when people or the students are not in person and they're remote, and so because of the back and forth, or just simply because of being in one modality for quite some time, certainly learning gaps can take place. And especially with long periods of time in remote, I know that in my district, we've been able to see when that has happened, rise in truancy, certainly rise in some mental health issues as well. And so there's learning gaps that we have to certainly address. And there are also some supports that we need to address for mental health as well, and they're not really separate from one another completely. So the quick and, I guess you could say, easy way to assess is to utilize some of the standardized testing that a district would have, whether it be NWEA, or even the state assessments, and to dig down deep. In order to do that, it's fine to assess and it's fine to look at the test results, but you really have to have a team of people who understand data and to be able to really dig down and find out where, what it's really telling you. Where are the gaps? So it's not just, for instance, in mathematics, the gaps in, geometry, but where in geometry? And, are we having gaps in specific areas of reading? So again, formulating a team to take the assessments that we're already doing, asking teachers to be able to also provide feedback from their own classes. How are the learners comparing to where their students had been in the past for the same coursework? That's important, and that would be done through survey. Again, bringing all that data back to a data team to be able to look at it, analyze it, and then formulate some plans. Now, some things that since we know there are gaps already that are going to be in place, most likely for learners, making certain that curriculum-wise, we are spending the time right off the bat next year doing the most essential elements of the curriculum. So we often go through and teach a wide array of the topics, subject matter, but being able to, over the summertime, if this hasn't already been done, be able to look at your areas of curriculum and find out what are the most essential areas, and making certain that we go very deep in those areas as opposed to being very broad with our topics. If we do that and we focus significantly on critical thinking or higher order thinking, then the gaps will close.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Cochran, this is the same question for you. You have 4 minutes.
You have to base your assessment of loss or change on a prior set of assessments. And that's really important. So we have to go back to the results that we do have unfortunately for us, most districts are in the same situation where we may not have assessments if we are looking on end of year benchmarks and that sort of thing. So we'll have to be a little bit strategic about how we do that. The other piece is that you have to understand where the students are based on formative assessment. So we'll do the back check, we'll go back, we'll do comparisons from this year to last year on the data that we have. But the other important strategic piece really is formative assessments. And formative assessments work has to be done this spring in order to begin in the fall, knowing basically where our kids are, both collectively and individually. Formative assessments have been found to be one of the single most important ways of achieving student improvement. And besides the big data look, we also have to get down as much as we can to the classroom. One of the problems that we have is the state has moved around the assessments that we've been using at the state level for multiple years. And so there's very little state level data to dig into. So that's going to make formative assessments and looking at both trends within our classrooms and specifics about individual students that we're going to have to glean through a lot of formative assessments. The formative assessments themselves should be a part of common everyday practice that allow us to differentiate instruction based on where kids are, where they're coming in the classroom. And so to some extent, it's just a bigger challenge, but using many of the models that we should be doing anyway.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen, we'll ask the same question of you.
Thank you. I agree with everything Dr. Cochran just said about the use of formative assessments and the state data and the other standardized assessments that we have. They've been completed in various timeframes. It's difficult to really triangulate that data itself and look at those markers. But we have talented teachers and staff that absolutely using formative and summative assessments. Again, a challenge now because their administration of even quizzes and tests right now is so different from what they might be used to. Although I think they're becoming more and more used to it and adapting to it with the online learning platforms. But it's something that we're going to have to look at, and that's speaking to the academic component. With respect to social emotional learning, that's going to be as big, and for many students, it may be even bigger than the academic potential deficits that students have. I think we all presume just by considering basic regression, when kids are out of school during the summertime, we know they regress about 2 months during that time. So there needs to be not only academic remediation, but also social emotional remediation. And we're not talking just about the kids themselves, their families. You know, there's been so much really real devastation that's happened to so many families and members of our community as a result of this pandemic. You know, students have had losses of family members, people have lost their jobs, financial situations have changed dramatically, along with the stress that has come with at-home learning for a lot of families, for a lot of kids. I know it's certainly not all lollipops and gumdrops here in my house, and my kids are doing quite well, and the teachers have done an exceptional job, but it's still been incredibly challenging. So we have to address those, at least those two things, but they're really more than two things. They're very multifaceted. And, you know, I think we've all heard the analogy of it's sort of like building a plane while you're flying it. That's going to be one of the things that we need to do. With Dr. Cochran's point about we need to start this assessment phase on the academics this spring, absolutely. And we can't just say, let's develop a plan and we're going to start doing that plan in the fall and start assessing and start to implement some strategies around supporting students and their families and our staff. That's another big part that we have to be sure that we're supporting. They've also had some of that same devastation across, you know, their families and in their lives. It's been truly stressful for them. But we're going to have to start with some strategies and supports right away. We're going to need to access some of the resources in the areas of mental health, because if kids aren't available to learn, if there are difficulties with their families, that's going to make it conceivably impossible for them to attend to their academics. So we're going to have to provide some supports. There are resources out there. There is funding out there. There's state funding, there's federal funding, there's private funding. We're going to have to go after that immediately. But there's also a lot of free resources to support, especially that social emotional learning piece. There are a number of agencies, I believe actually, Timberlane, I'm sure, has received some of the benefit. I worked with the Community Alliance for Teen Safety to write a grant that brought in $120,000 to our region to provide some of the social emotional supports already. Some of that money is available. The Governor's Youth Council has $2 million available to provide supports to adolescents and children to help cope with the negative impact of the pandemic. So we're going to have to work expeditiously to utilize all of those resources and apply them to supporting the entire educational community right from the start.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kellen. We are back to the start of our rotational order. So Dr. Cochran, you will be the first to answer the following question. Once again, this is a 4-minute question. So during your first interviews with our search committee, all 3 of you spoke of your intent to prioritize time during your first 6 months as superintendent to meet various stakeholders, build relationships across our schools in our 4 towns. So aside from this goal around relationship building, what will be your top priority during your first 6 months as the new superintendent of SAU 106? And a second part to this question is, what is your 5-year goal, not only for the district, but for yourself professionally?
Okay. Top priority in the first 6 months really is going to be around hiring processes, looking at where we are. We have a strong curriculum-based people have been working on that for an extended period of time. We know we have had a significant pause in our work on competency-based instruction. And so that's something we have to look at. I think it would be appropriate at this point in time, given the upheaval of COVID, to go back and take a look at the strategic plan. I do have a significant amount of experience with the strategic plan as well. And then moving forward, we have to look at systems and programs. We have some work to do with respect to evaluations and processes in that regard. So there's the low, slow grind of the putting systems in place, doing those things better, getting better support for our students, better support for our teachers, and alignment of resources. But beyond that, I think the other piece that I'm really looking forward to is getting out in the community more, getting to meet more parents, getting to be able to get into classrooms more than I have been. I've been pleased to get in as much as I have, but I think getting that sense, especially for curriculum, where we are with instruction, will really help me work with district and building leadership to plan for next steps, see where we're getting levels of success that we're happy with and where we're not, bring in some resources. Mike Anderson, who recently did some PD for us on the 27th. I previously worked with Mike for 3 years on social emotional learning. And I know both other candidates have spoken to the need in the community. One of the things that we did in Barnstead was work 3 years with Mike on social emotional learning. And that really built a level of relationships within the schools that really helped us to go to the next step, which is looking at trauma-informed practice. And that's important because, especially coming out of COVID, you're going to have a lot of students and families that are hurting. And so I think that's one of the things we really have to ramp up. I think it's hard to overestimate the loss, both the academic loss, and as we mentioned also, the loss in terms of social emotional growth, a loss in self-esteem. So those are the areas that we need to ramp up on fairly quickly. So it's kind of a multi-pronged piece, but getting to know the district at a deeper level, finding out where we are with respect to social emotional learning, being able to support students more in the classroom and families more. I think we could do better in terms of communication in general, but just knowing more about the district and who we are as a group. I think we have a ton of very good people. I just like to get to know them more and be able to take advantage of all the skill set and the knowledge and the experience that we have.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen?
Absolutely, a top priority, as we just talked about, will be really re-assimilating back into the in-person instruction and dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Along with that will be really the need to establish the engagement of the community in order to remedy those skill deficits as far as academic goes, as well as social emotional. But my top priorities would be really to work on the engagement, letting people get to know me. It's important that, I know a lot of folks in the community, but there are many more that I don't know. So really engaging all stakeholders, the entire educational community, and that includes students, it includes families, staff, the school board, the entire, other community members, community agencies. In order to do that, I would really spend a whole lot of time out in the schools. I would spend a portion of every day out in the schools. I do know that's incredibly difficult. There might be days that it can't happen, but quite frankly, I think one of the greatest assets of the location of the SAU building is right next door. So at any moment, I could, take a walk out and walk over to the high school or the middle school. So I really see myself engaging with students in their classrooms, setting up plans where for all of the stakeholders, again, students, staff, families, community members, school board members. I'd be going on listening tours, having meetings with students, school visits, student activities, community events. Now that we know how to use video conferencing, continue to use all of that. And we really need to take that focus on engaging all members of the community in developing a strategic plan to move the district forward. A big piece of that too is it will be a brand new SAU. So one of my roles will absolutely have to be ensuring that we're doing all of the necessary procedures and ensuring that policies are developed. I would assume that a whole lot of the policies will need to be revised. So we'll have to have a plan for addressing all of that. And really, working to ensure that we have solid strategic planning with full engagement from families and full engagement of our staff and our students and the entire community to move the district forward.
Thank you, Mr. Khan.
Wasn't there another part to that about in 5 years?
Yes, about your own personal goals in 5 years. Yep,
Sure.
And the district.
My personal goal in 5 years would be to be the superintendent of the Timberlane Regional School District. I've been in Derry for 26 years. There would be very few school districts that I would consider moving to. This is the #1 school district that I would choose to move to. And if I come here, this will be it. This I would expect to be my last stop on the train.
Thank you. Mr. Duncan, we'll ask the same questions of you.
So in addition to, relationships, as you said, that's something we all need to focus on. More specifically, however, I would say the relationships with some specific groups of individuals would be that I would want to spend a fairly good amount of time with the school board and getting to know them and them getting to know me. It's important for a school board to set goals every single year for the district, and to be part of that process would be very important. Similarly, getting to know the administrative team that I'd be working with, and if there are any vacancies, also helping to fill those vacancies with team members that are going to really work well with everyone. And so that getting to know people can be certainly talking, and but it also can be actually just through doing the work that we need to do. If there's a data team, then we're getting right involved with them and looking at what already exists and what doesn't. If not, then to formulate probably a small data team fairly quickly would be important, just to be able to analyze information quickly. People with different skill sets. The association leaders, so the teacher association leaders, the support staff association leaders, It's very important that that relationship gets started right away, and that I'm listening. And this has been a tough year. This has not been an easy year for anyone. It's been, but it's tough every year. You know, teaching and in a community and being in the public and working with so many kids, it's just very difficult work. So the individuals who are in the trenches, I guess you could say, know what's happening, and they know about the district. They know what they want to see the district kind of achieve. And so I want to know a lot more about that and the perspective that they have. And again, to build that relationship. Now, the more of a technical, I think, thing that I would like to make sure that we do over the first 3 to 6 months would be to make sure that I do a really thorough audit of things that some other people have mentioned, such as, you know, where are the policies at? How is our district's technology plan, or, you know, the focus on security, for instance, and looking into the history. What are some things that have gone really well? What's going well? What has not been going well? If there is a strategic plan that's out there, what's our progress on it? And you know, do we need to do something? So really, it's more finding out more about what is already going on. Now, change happens in a district if you're going to really make some good change in a way that's going to be systemic in about a 9-10 year period of time. And so I would break it up into the first 3 years being a time of reflection, second 3 years a time of collaboration, and the next 3 years after that a time of innovation. And that cycle continues on and on, even, you know, within itself. But basically, to over a 3 year period of time, involve all the stakeholders to be able to make certain that we're finding out exactly who we are and what we want to become. And then the next 3 years really planning on and continuing to work on certain things that we need to solidify where we want to be going and make sure that's really in policy and accepted by the board and the public. And then after that, to get into a system or a pattern of innovation. And so within that, there's 5 years, right? So 5 years, I would be the superintendent of this district, and I would be personally, hopefully, if I had the time, it all depends. There's a lot of time that takes to really do the work of this job. And this is a large district. I want to work on completing my next round of the educational process for myself, working on my doctorate. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Our next question will be directed to Mr. Kellen first. Once again, this is a 4-minute question. So as you all know, we are a regional school district, and stakeholder groups across our 4 towns often have divergent viewpoints and unique perspectives. Based on some of your past experiences, how will you unite our district toward a shared vision?
Okay. You know, that's something I have thought about. It's really interesting that, yes, having the 4 different towns, one of the big differences, of course, you have 2 districts that have significantly lower tax rates than the other 2. You have Sandown and Danville with tax rates in that $28 to $30 per thousand range, and Plastow and Atkinson in that $18 to $20-ish range. And that certainly poses some issues. Historically, in a larger town like Derry, you still have those varying opinions. You have where Derry has a very high tax rate, more like the Sandown and Danville tax rate. And you have various stakeholders who are okay with the tax rate, and then others that aren't. Along with tax rates, so you have varying opinions with regard to just educational practices. You're going to have family members, staff, students. Everyone has an opinion, and everybody has their experiences on which they base their opinions. So in order to bring everybody together, I think it's essential that first and foremost, establishing those relationships and building those relationships across the various stakeholders, giving people the opportunity to get to know one another. learning each other's perspectives. That's one of the things that I found over the years. I've spent a lot of time as a special education administrator really resolving conflicts. When there's a conflict between the staff members or the professional members of the team and perhaps the family as to what might be the best way to provide for the student, you really have to spend time learning one another's perspectives. And the more information we have, the better we understand each other and their perspectives and from where people are coming, it's easier to reach some common ground. So we need to identify those shared beliefs and those shared values that are consistent among all of the towns and develop plans and strategies around those shared beliefs and values, those common understandings, those things that we can agree upon. Once we can identify some of the things we can agree upon, we can move away from spending all of our time disagreeing. And when we do disagree, we need to do so with dignity. We need to do so in a way that's respectful of one another. We need to be respectful of one another's opinions. And again, by learning about one another and learning those differences, it makes it a lot easier for us to work together on those things on which we agree. And then we can start to work at those other things on which we don't agree so much. And through those relationships that we build, we can do it respectfully and we can move forward positively.
Thank you very much. Mr. Duncan?
Well, yes, okay, I'm unmuted, I'm sorry. The question was, we have a divergent group of thinkers. We have towns that view things differently. I will first of all start off by saying that I currently work in Jaffrey Ringe, and Jaffrey and Ringe are very different communities. We're joking around before this kind of got started, not joking around, but just kind of talking about our recent budget hearings. And I said I didn't really, we had a few people there and it was pretty fast. And the first year I got there, and in the second year as well, there were hundreds of individuals, and it largely was because of the difference in thinking between the two communities. Certainly the different view of taxes, the different view of education. So over a period of time, we've been able to find common ground and be able to move forward with just as an example, just one thing, our budgeting process to be able to accomplish what we all agree upon educationally that we want, while also understanding the needs of our community financially. So it takes time. As stated before, it takes building relationships and listening, but it also takes very clear action and making certain that the steps that we take to improve, for instance, like a budget process, is extremely transparent and known to the communities. Now, to make certain that we are moving forward together, there's a lot of different groups that we have to make certain that we communicate with. And I say we because it's not just me, it would be the leadership team, the school board as well, because the school board would need to be on board with any type of action of this nature. Would be that we really want to make certain that we talk to the teachers, to the educators, again, the individuals who really are working day in and day out with our students, and to find out first and foremost from them, what is it they want for their district? What is it that they really love? What is it that they desire? Where do they think they can be in 5, 6, 7 years or so? Find that out. The same thing with our students. They're the individuals who we're here to serve and to support. And so finding out from them what's going well, what's not going well. And then doing that same thing over some time within the first year, 2 years with various groups. I love what someone said earlier about getting in face-to-face small groups, kind of almost like some town hall meetings to talk about what people value within their school, what they like, what they don't particularly like, and what they wish things could be. And this is just a first round of data collection But it's important because then we take that data collection from all groups that we meet with over a period of time, and we take that and we organize. And this becomes a little more specific. We would organize a large group of individuals to come together over a period of days, perhaps, if they can commit to that, and from all across the various stakeholder groups. A district this size, probably about 100, 150 people we're talking about. If we can get that, as many more is fine. Certainly have to have the space to be able to do it, and be able to break people off into groups and start to ask questions about where do we see our school in the future? Where do we want our students to be in the future? What do we want their outcomes to be? What are the future, what is education going to be like, or what are their jobs going to need to be in the future? And start with the learner themselves and say, let's focus on this. We all agree that the kids are the most important thing. Now, what can we do together to agree upon as a direction for the entire system? And then that becomes adopted by the school board, more or less policy, and we start to make decisions based upon that, something that we've all agreed upon.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran will ask the same question of you.
Okay. In my experience, a shared vision can only come from shared conversation. And shared conversation comes around determination of things that we value. And I think that's the nexus of this whole thing. What do we value? And I know board members will recognize from this budget conversations earlier in the year, budgeting is about what we value. And those conversations have to be fairly transparent. Actually, I've been involved in a similar multi-year process of this type of scope. I co-chair the Future of National High Schools Committee, along with Principal Jen Susing. We had multiple groups, multiple surveys. We were looking at the same thing Timberlane did a few years ago. How are we doing with our high school scheduling? Where do we go? It's going to drive our program. It's going to drive so many other decisions. We brought in national experts. But the big piece was, after we had all the information, what do we value the most? Schedules drive whether or not orchestra and band or foreign language will be done one semester versus another, all those other decisions. And in trying to come up with that vision, with input from literally hundreds and hundreds of parents, hundreds of teachers, scores of administrators, took time, took surveys, took listening. It took more than a year to put that plan together in a way that we could sit down with our stakeholders at the end of the day and say, do we have this right? Have we been inclusive? Have we been forward thinking? Are we prioritizing the things that we can? Have we determined, what the cost will be financially, in terms of resources, in terms of teacher time, in terms of administrator time? And can we make this work to the betterment of all of our current and future high school students? And it's an important task, but absent those discussions at that level, down to what are we willing to spend our money on, you're not going to get where you need to go. Because when it comes down to it, you can create a wonderful vision, but if you don't have community buy-in, then you're not going to get it funded, and you're going to have frustration. And so that's that piece that both of the other two have spoken to so well. Getting to know your people, whether it be listening tours or whether it's being in the community or just setting up shop and letting parents know that you're going to be available at Pollard, at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night to anybody who wants to come in and talk. So it's informal stuff, it's formal stuff, it's surveys. When people know that you're actually listening and that they're going to be heard, you can move things forward. As we found out in Nashua, we had tremendous success. We saw great academic growth. We saw problems solved around scheduling. We saw people come to put new visions in place as a result of the things that we hadn't even thought about until we went into that planning process. And that's what can happen in that sort of synergistic piece, when you don't start with basically a plan and make it happen, but you start by listening. And listening intently. And I think both the other two gentlemen have spoken to it as well. But I think it's that inclusive. Yes, the towns are different. Yes, the tax rates are different, but there are some common values that can bind us together. And we have to respect our differences, agree to disagree at times, but move forward collectively. And I think that we can do that.
Thank you, Dr. Cochran. We'll move on to our next question, which will be directed to Mr. Duncan first. This again is a 4-minute question. The question is, when faced with the need to make significant cuts to the district budget, how do you go about prioritizing needs and determining where to make those cuts?
Well, if cuts need to be made, then the first thing to do is not to look at specific areas such as teachers, support staff, administrators. That's not the first place to look when you have a budgeting process. Timberlane has a budget, operating budget of over $70 million, and so the first thing to do is to look at the multi-year trends, 3 to 5 years preferably, in all areas, even supplies. So it's been my experience in every budgeting process that I've been a part of. When I was at the SAU 29 over in Keene, which was a fairly large multi-district SAU, I was in charge of the towns. I helped out with the budgeting process in Keene, but also had 6 other districts that I had to work with. All of them had spending trends that, if we looked at it, we could find actually relatively significant savings, significant to their budgets. The same thing has happened with the district that I'm currently in. I talked last time about the 2 different towns and viewing budgets differently, taxes differently. Cooperative districts are difficult because of how the agreements usually are to fund the educational system. And so what we've been able to do is really take a hard look at every single line and make certain that we are cutting out the buffers that are not necessary. Sometimes you have to look hard in areas of staffing. For instance, I'll give you an example. We, in my current district, can always have a surplus of about, let's say, 300,000 in the area of staffing. And it has been that way for about 7 years. That trend, by looking at trend data, you can predict what's going to happen next. And so you're able to say, all right, well, we can keep our staffing levels as best as we possibly can to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish, hopefully through through some shared visioning and planning that we've had. But and we can do that by saying, listen, our practices have been this, and our practices haven't changed, and they're likely to bear us these numbers over here. We have some flexibility. So it's more trend-based budgeting as opposed to sometimes what we consider, what's the phrase that we would use, be the actual numbers budgeting. So that's one thing to do. Then if after that there are more cuts that need to be made, then certainly the conversation with the school board and finding out exactly where it wants the district to go, and if where those areas, it could be facilities, perhaps it could be staffing. Staffing usually is the majority of the budget in a school district. We just have to be very careful and selective about where we want it to go, but it has to be based upon where the board and where the community has decided this is a direction we want to move. Don't cut positions or cut areas that are going to stall your growth or inhibit you from reaching your goals.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran, this question is for you second today.
Okay. To some extent, situations like this happen because we allow things to accumulate over the years rather than having it a quick look, or we should be taking a deeper dive. Where are we not budgeting appropriately? Most school districts, the state of New Hampshire is decreasing its student enrollment by about 1% a year. Timberlane is decreasing at 2% a year. That means that our costs should be coming down in some areas. So are we actually ordering the right number of textbooks, the right number of materials, the right number as student numbers drop? One of the problems with public budgeting is you typically start with last year's budget and make the assumption that the next year is going to be like the prior one. And that's not always true. And so you have to plan, you have to manage, you have to take the savings that you have in one area and spend it, whether it's on facilities, and we know we have significant facilities needs, or getting ahead in technology, and we actually have done that in that area. But I think you have to look at the budget process holistically. You have to take a good look every year. You have to scrutinize the money. You have to be willing to accept difficult questions about where you're going with a particular budget. I have had, Sandy, some experience in a situation like this. I was the assistant superintendent in Nashua when we had a $3.2 million shortfall. We found out about it in the spring as our existing superintendent was leaving and the new one was not in yet. And I was one of 2 or 3 people who had to manage that cut. And it was difficult. And part of the problem was late in the season, about the only place that you can find that type of money is in positions. And so we had to scrutinize positions. It was a horrible experience. We had people who were missing one letter of reference to hire them in the next school board meeting. And we went through a Monday night meeting and hired maybe 40 people. And there were 10 people who were there on the list. So they had one more reference letter in their package. They would have been hired. The next day we found out we're short $3.2 million. So you really pull the stakeholders together, look at it, administration. If you're doing a good job of budgeting up until then you know where you can and where you can't go to get money. You know, in our case, we worked with the unions and we were able to substitute paras to supervise computer labs rather than teachers, and it saved us multiple millions. And we found some other creative things to do to save monies. But when you're hit with a big sticker shock like that, you know, if you don't already know where your budget is and where you have some place to go, if you needed to, then you're really not prepared. So having gone through that and knowing, you know, what it's like, in a lot of cases, if it's a massive amount of money, as it was in Nashua in that case, it's difficult to not have it come around personnel. And the difficult part of that is that your personnel are your most important assets in the district. It's the people that make a difference every day. And to have to you know, riff people in a situation like that, it's difficult. You have hardworking people who've done their due diligence and do great work on behalf of your students. That's why, you know, those sorts of situations are very difficult. And I'm sure all 3 of us have had situations where we had to make those decisions. But, you know, it has to come with conversations about what we value, because budgeting is a value-based proposition. We need to know where we're getting results and where we're not. We need to go where we're headed and why. And, you know, we have to align those things. What do we value for our students? What do we value as a community? And how do we come together in a way that does the greatest good with the resources that we have? And we have creative people and we have good problem solvers. We have people who go above and beyond, you know, every day, every week, every year. And so we can do it in a situation like that, but it's tough. It's a real gut punch to a school district, because we are in many ways a community, and a community that supports each other. And, you know.
Dr. Cochran, your 4 minutes is up, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kellen?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question with respect to, you know, how do you make those difficult decisions with regard to cutting budgets? I think the perspective that we're always looking to have to cut the budget, that's one of the places that I'd like to look at differently. Revenues. So revenues from the state have been decreasing. You know, the adequacy education state funding has been decreasing. When you look at your tax bill, you look at the state education tax, it's say $2 of your $20 tax rate. It's significantly low. So we have to recognize that less and less money is coming from the state and potentially at times, less is coming from the federal government. So it's really a local proposition. And as Dr. Cochran was just saying, we really have to look at what do we value as a local community in supporting our students' education? What do we value, as far as, supporting our teachers, supporting our related service providers, our staff, our administration in meeting those students' needs? And what can our taxpayers afford? Well, looking at alternative revenues is one way that I've been able to be successful in Derry. And we've expanded in special education, we've expanded our programming dramatically. We had a huge need for students with autism, educational program for students with autism. And many of these students, if not all who are in the program that I'm about to talk about, would be placed out of district. And I won't go into all the details, but I've brought in, it's called the New England Center for Children Partner Classrooms, partnered with the New England Center for Children, which is one of the world leaders in providing autism supports and education to students. And in doing so, I started that with ARA funds. So when you have these opportunities of alternative funding sources, so that was back in 2009, 2010, we had 2 years of funding, started this program. The cost of the program is about $450,000 annually to meet the needs of 8 students. And it's highly staffed, high quality staff with a ton of professional learning that goes into supporting these staff members and being able to do it. If a student was to attend a school like the Melmark School, which is more local to us, the New England Center, that costs a minimum of $120,000 a year. I've been able to create these programs, by bringing in this resource and supporting it, and at a cost of 52 to 60% of the actual cost of the out-of-district tuition. So you have to look at alternatives, not only as alternative revenues, there are private revenues out there, but you have to look at how can we save money with the programs that we have. Can we create programs for students that have significant needs? And can we create those programs at a lower cost? I've done it with a number of programs. We have a program called ISLE. It's for students with multiple handicapping conditions. We have a program for students with emotional disturbance. And as I said, the New England Center programs. We now have 4 classrooms across our 5 elementary schools. We have a middle school classroom. We're starting a second middle school classroom, and I worked with Pinkerton Academy to start that program. So we've been able to save millions of dollars in out-of-district placements, quite frankly, and providing a higher quality of education to students staying in their community. And so there are countless opportunities, I think, that we can look at. How can we do so more affordably and provide a greater level of supports and education to all of our students?
Great, thank you, Mr. Cullen. At this point, we are just 6 questions in, just right under halfway through the forum. So we are going to pause and take a 5-minute break. And we invite the 3 of you, if you would like, feel free to turn off your cameras, stretch your legs, move around, get a drink of water. It is 8:08. We will reconvene at 8:13 and wrap up our questions. So thank you very much, and we will see you shortly.
Thank you.
Everyone. Hope you all had a chance to take a break and stretch your legs. We'll move forward with our 7th question. Dr. Cochran, this will be directed to you first. The question is, what has your relationship been like between you and the various unions or collective bargaining units in the districts where you have had an administrative role? And again, this is a 4-minute question.
That would be Nashua, Litchfield, Bernstead, and Timberlane. I think pretty strong in Nashua. They're an AFT district, and Terry Donovan, I worked with fairly extensively there. And most of because I was an assistant superintendent, a lot of my role was problem solving, some grievances, some other things, but basically maintaining communication, working to find solutions, and that sort of piece. In Litchfield as superintendent, it was a much more expansive role. Met regularly with the union president, worked on initiatives proactively, did grievances as required, but really had some good conversations about the same sort of value things and where are we. In Litchfield, there was a significant teacher contract situation. The union had been without a new contract and raises for 5 years. We were starting to bleed some very good teachers. And in my very first year, it was a contract negotiation role. And as normal as superintendent, I sat in on negotiations. We had a potential agreement that did not pass. It failed by some around 40 votes. And I actually took the lead in working with the negotiating committee to go back and go from a 3-year contract down to a 2-year contract. Was able to get most of the benefits in the original contract. Some small marginal changes, but the biggest change was going from a 3-year to a 2-year contract. And so that passed, not by a huge margin, but by enough that we are able to get teachers both steps and raises for 2 years. And it was badly needed, both from a morale perspective and also from a retention of our best teachers perspective. With Barnstead, it was again AFT, Terry Donovan, or sorry, NEA, and basically did some negotiations. The board did most of the negotiations. I worked on some ancillary things. We negotiated a new teacher evaluation system. Worked on some benefits things. There were some things that were missing from the package. Some disability bank things, that sort of thing, and just working on a positive way. 2 unions, one for the paraprofessionals and one for the teachers. Met regularly with both. One of the things that I found most enjoyable is working with folks and listening to them. And one of the things that happened in Barnstead was we're having conversations with the paras. We're doing this 3-year social emotional learning piece with Mike Anderson. We're doing, great things. We were providing resources for teachers. And the para leadership group approached and said, we're involved in this very much. We'd like to be a complete part of all the PD and all the resources. And so we were able to get them to, we changed some contract time and how we use some time. So they were able to attend all the PD, because paras are so crucial to the social emotional experiences and what happens in the classroom. And up to the point where we actually gave them the same resources and professional development the other teachers, who's got huge buy-in, significant improvement. And so to me, it's problem solving, it's being respectful, it's following your processes, and it's just working with people, trying to meet with them on a regular basis, be proactive, know what their concerns are, and try to address them as best you can.
Thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen, we'll direct this same question to you, please.
I'm sorry, I know what it's generally, but I just want to make sure I get all asked.
Absolutely. So the question is, what has your relationship been like between you and the unions or collective bargaining units in the districts where you have had an administrative role?
Okay, it was as simple as I thought. Great, thank you. My relationships with, we have the Dairy Education Association, and we have AFSCME for the paraprofessional and all assistants, actually reading assistants, computer assistants, Title I assistants are all in that AFSCME collective bargaining unit. We did last year, the food service workers have unionized. I've not yet been involved with that, any negotiations with the food service. As I said, they just started last year. But with the other two, with DEA, which is NEA, a New Hampshire Education Association, and AFSCME, I have been involved in all of the negotiations in my 24 years of being there. Very directly with AFSCME, because it really was started by the special education assistants. And so I have been on the negotiating team for every one of those collective bargaining agreements. For the DEA collective bargaining agreements, I've been on the team, I'm estimating probably between 4 and 6 times on the team of the collective bargaining agreements that have ranged from, we've had, right, like just this for the upcoming year, we have a 1-year agreement. We've had 2-year agreements, and we've had as many as 3-year agreements. And even those times that I wasn't on the team, I was very involved behind the scenes as the director of student services going back to my first couple of years. My relationship with them has been excellent. The paraprofessional, the assistants union asked me. I've worked with the president of that association. I want to say she is close to 40 years in our district as a paraprofessional. She's not the only one in her family that works there. She's been tremendous in working collaboratively with us. And we've worked on a lot of different aspects, even outside of collective bargaining, really providing professional learning experiences for that group, as well as really working to support them, because what they do is just outstanding. And it's not for a lot of money. I think anybody who knows anything about paraprofessionals, they don't get paid a heck of a lot, but they put a whole lot of themselves into their jobs. The professional staff union, the collective bargaining agreement with the DEA president and the DEA officers. I've known them all for quite some time. The union president and I have a longstanding relationship. She's one of our special ed facilitators. So she and I have worked extensively together, not only on negotiations and implementing the CBA, but just daily. She says, make sure you tell them they can call me. We have a great rapport. When we disagree, we do so respectively, and we spend time learning, each other's perspective, and we're always able to work things out. With impact bargaining over COVID and, staff returning to work, we spent about the last 6 months. We just finished our impact bargaining two weeks ago with respect to the conditions or the impact that COVID has had on our ability to really move forward with the contract and ensure that everybody's safe, and that we're meeting all of the articles outlined in the contract and supporting our staff to be safe while they're providing for our students. So I've had excellent relationships with our both units that I've with whom I've worked, and I think I would take the same approach that I always have, and that's just being, having that ability to listen, spending time learning each other's perspectives, figuring out what we value together, and being able to agree on those top priorities.
Great, thank you, Mr. Cullen. Mr. Duncan, we'll ask the same question of you.
So my relationships have, for the most part, been very productive and very good. So I would summarize it in what I've been told by union presidents, leadership, whether it be teachers associations or support staff associations, that I'm approachable. And so whether it was as an assistant principal, as a principal, assistant superintendent, or superintendent, for the most part of those many years, I've had relationships with the leadership of the associations such that I had an open door policy. And so they can come in, they can have a conversation, they email me, they want to meet with me. I go over and meet with them in their classroom. Rather than them coming to me, I'm the one who's a little more mobile that way. Specific examples, Marlboro, when I was a principal there in that K-8 school system, Vivian was the president of the association. And we did a lot of really neat things in that school district that the teachers are very proud of, and I was very proud of. But before we would go too far, I would go and talk with her and ask her about the pulse of things, the speed at which things can move. What I wanted her thoughts. She had been there for many years. I hadn't been at that point in time. She was a wonderful educator, really hard worker, and She just had a lot of insight. And so we worked very closely together at that school. It was a tight-knit community. And so it was really actually a fantastic time. The SAU position, same system, but at the central office in Keene, I spent time with several union presidents from all the towns as well as the Keene itself. And so again, same type of approach, good relationships with every single one of them, spend a lot of time in some areas during some specific seasons to help support, to listen, to help move things along in a good way. And we were very productive in those areas. Coming over to Jaffrey, my relationship with the president of both associations was really actually fantastic. I would say really the highlight. The Support Staff Association, I've been negotiating all their contracts as well as the teachers' contracts as well. They had a history of not passing contracts, or at least not anything more than a one-year contract. And we've been successful with passing multiple multi-year contracts now since I've been there. And we've worked together to do that. The president of the Teachers Association, when I got there, actually was a real support in us moving forward with developing our district strategic design. And again, a very collaborative effort, met whenever he wanted to, and address the issues right away. The support staff, last week, there was a situation that had arisen that needed my attention. I went to the elementary school where the person was. I stayed with her and talked with her for a couple hours. There was a duty that she had. I did duty with her to make sure that everything was in good order so we could still communicate. I think that it's been a really wonderful relationship. I can't say that everything's been perfect. Through my time at Jaffrey, there have been about 4 changes now of the Teachers Association leadership. It's certainly we're very professional. We're looking right now to find more of a specific pattern of meeting times, more regular. We did work last year with a different president with Harvard to work as a administration, school board, and the union to work on looking at practices that we can just really work well together.
Duncan, I'm sorry, your 4 minutes is up, sir.
Sure.
Sorry. Sandy, next question.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Our next question will be directed to Mr. Kellen first, for starters. This is once again a 4-minute question. The question is this: it is very important for a leader to be present and visible to all of our students across our communities. With such a large district, how would you achieve that? And how would you foster student voice in your administration?
Sure. As I said before, my goal would be to spend time every day in a school and to spend time in every school at least once a week. Again, understanding there might be days that seems impossible, but again, the location of the office is so conducive to really being able to spend time with students. Walking into the high school, the middle school, I'm very familiar with the fields and the surroundings over there. Spending time after school, going out to all the various sporting events that might be happening, going over to the PAC Center, enjoying listening to students practice and rehearse for plays and music, the band, getting out to each of the elementary schools in each of the towns, enjoying the activities that they have to offer. But again, spending time talking with students. Student voice is one of the most essential things as part of education. So I would do listening tours. I would have the opportunity for one-to-one discussions, group discussions, meet with student organizations like student government, student council, meet with the various clubs, meet with any students that want to meet at any given time. I would make myself available to meet with those students and spend time going into classrooms, seeing what they're learning, participate in those learning activities. I would be an ever-present part of the entire school community and really spend time. That's what it's all about. It's really, the best part of education is being able to spend time with students. I really look forward to that as in my role as assistant superintendent. You don't always have as much of that same opportunity. Our roles as assistant superintendent oftentimes have to do with supporting the superintendent's ability to be able to do that. So I really hope for the opportunity to be able to do that by becoming a superintendent, to really increase the amount of time that I'm able to spend with students and really engage them in those conversations, so their voice is absolutely primary in our decision-making regarding their education.
Thank you, Mr. Kellen. Mr. Duncan, we'll direct the same question to you, please, for 4 minutes.
So if you were to walk with me through the hallways of the school district that I'm in, or the school district that I was in before, the school districts, people would know who I am. The teachers would know who I am. We'd be talking to each other, first name basis, and the students would know who I am. They know that I'm Mr. Duncan. Some of them, because of my hair, have other names for me. Jack Frost, Q-Tip, but it's fun, and they're certainly not being rude or anything. It's enjoyable. So you get that by making certain that you keep the most important thing at the center. We all three of us talked about it. And the most important thing is the learner, is the child. And you can't seriously do this job by sitting in an office, though you can, say that you're working for the betterment of each child. If you're not actually there talking with them, working with them, being present, working with the teachers who are working with them, substituting in classes once in a while, if you can. In my current, I've had some great opportunities. So these are some examples of things I've done. One year I was asked to approve a certain type of teaching situation over at the high school because there were some learners who had some difficulty in mathematics and they wanted to have some smaller classes and so forth. Class was first period of the day. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. I was certified in mathematics. I love staying in the classroom. I don't care how far away from the classroom I am position-wise, I want to be with the students. And so we found a way. I couldn't make it all the time, so I had to have a co-teacher, and that was the assistant superintendent. We also had another individual work with us, and we were able to really connect with the learners in such a huge way that year. I still have great relationships with those kids. So being there with them, going through the struggles, understanding them, listening to them in authentic ways that are important to them, that's the key. And similarly, I've done that with some elementary classes and some middle school classes. So as Christopher said before, it's about being present, and it's about making sure that it's important. And it's not just, oh, I have time today to do it. It's, no, this is the most important thing, and I'm doing it. And on my way to work, I'm stopping and over here at Danville, and over here, I'm stopping and over at Sandown. And in the evening, maybe it's reversed, And so obviously, because of where the central office is, it makes it easier to go to the middle school and the high school area. But it's important. And it's important that it's not just me. It's important that we have a team of individuals. Central office should not be separate from where the real action is.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran, if you could please answer the same question.
Sorry, student voice to me is crucial. It was important in the everyday scheme of things. It's important in understanding the superintendent's role and administration's role. In one of my previous districts, I was doing some classroom visits, and I popped in and happened to be the president of the teachers union. And the teacher introduced me to her class by saying, This is Dr. Cochran. He's the principal's boss, so he's the big boss. And I was kind of taken aback because I kind of see administrative leadership as a duty, as a calling. And I believe that administration only exists to serve classrooms and teachers and paras and students. And, we don't build schools for administration. We build it for the learning that happens in the classrooms. Some people would regard us as a necessary evil, but I think we're mostly a force of trying to do what's good and try to maximize what's happening in our district. But that notion of service to me is very important. So what I did, I was up to the board and I drew the little org chart, and here's the school board and the principal reports, the superintendent reports to the school board, and then the principal, and then the teachers, and then the students. And I said, so what do you think is the most important level? And the kids are going, superintendent or administration. And so we had a little chat, and I said, here's my belief. And I drew it around teachers and students. And I said, this is why we exist. We exist to serve you and help you learn and progress through your education and get the best education that you can. And the little boy whose parent was on the school board had his hand and said, you mean it's not the school board? And I said, well, actually, no, you guys are why we do all of this. So I think that relationship is important. And I think it's part of my attitude in terms of student voice and voice of everyone, the conversation about the powers. But I think it's especially important, especially in today's day and age. Students have access to media. They have access to a lot of ways to contribute and listen. And I think we need to give them opportunities to develop that voice because they're going to need it where they're going. Hopefully our students are going off to college and careers and do other things. And they need to have developed that voice and that perspective. And voice, in my perspective, doesn't just mean speaking, it means listening and being part of a conversation. And that piece is important for the superintendent in terms of those opportunities that you have to do it, but also ensuring this happening within the schools. Students need to be heard. They need to know that we're listening. And I think one of the important things that we do as leadership is show that we care. I try to get in buildings whenever I can. And, in many days, it's the best part of my day, even if I can only make it in for 10 or 15 minutes. And I do pop into the middle school and the high school a lot. But I also try to get out to the elementaries, even though it's a further drive. And it just keeps me grounded. And I think, provides the opportunity to see what's going on there. How are students engaging? Are they having opportunity for voice and contribution and choice and in the classroom? It's one of the things that I think Timberlane is quite good at, and I think we need to accentuate even more. I think we do it well, but that notion of voice has to start at the top, and it has to go all the way through the system, and it's effective.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. Our next question will be directed to Mr. Duncan first. This is a 2-minute question. You all have had a bit of an opportunity to speak to this with regard to an earlier question that was asked. But the question is this: how will you address the ever-changing landscape of the needs of social and emotional learning, especially in response to stressors that have arisen due to school closures and COVID-19, which have caused mental health needs to rise dramatically across our district and state? Bit of a lengthy question. So again, 2 minutes. It's just an opportunity to follow up regarding social emotional learning with regard to the pandemic that we are living through right now. So.
Well, certainly the first thing that I would need to do in the role would be to encourage the leaders of the school to, if I can, to talk also to all staff members about the importance of social emotional well-being for our learners. By myself, I can't do a whole lot, certainly not in a short period of time. Long period of time, yes, there are partnerships that we can develop. I have one currently that I've just developed in the district with the Department of Education that we're working on systems of social emotional support. I have a partnership with Antioch University, and I have people coming over to provide services to learners who have some high needs and their families as well. So all of that work has to be done, but that takes some serious time. So where you get the biggest bang is by making certain that we communicate to all staff saying this is an important part of our job. Math, science, social studies, music, art, those are all very important, but through our instruction, what are we doing in our lesson plans to help promote social emotional well-being? And it's just small things, but consistent throughout the organization. And so that's really where you have to start, and then make certain that you have, with the principals of the schools, some small plans that they're continuously having the dialogue, they're having a conversation, that the professionals within the school, such as the guidance counselors, social workers, and so forth, are helping lead the way. And hopefully there are teams already in place to do that and to make certain that that students are being followed, certainly more so than ever.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran, if you could answer the same question, please.
Yeah, I think in terms of the ever-changing structure of social emotional learning, and as it relates to the pandemic, one of the main things is, of course, maintaining relationships and developing those relationships and cultivating them as two-way relationships. The work that we spent in Barnstead started off in that regard, as I've spoken to earlier. And one of the ways that we championed that work, or I championed that work, was first to find the money, second to find the time, third to be there at every single social emotional learning workshop that happened across the 3 years and be present for that PD to show that administration valued it, that the superintendent valued it, and not only sit in on the session, but participate in the group dialogue and the group conversations, and those were multiple. Be able to engage with them as an equal, to ask questions, to have them ask questions of me, showing that we were looking at this in a systemic way, showing that in fact this was the first building block, and the next step was to look at trauma-informed schools. We're also looking at discipline that was more proactive and student mitigated. So some sort of diversion program that really allowed students to take ownership of a part of that process in certain cases. So it's the relationships, it's the notion of the collective efficacy and support of each other, but it's also the development, I think, of the notion of mindfulness. Mindfulness itself is a phenomenon that's relatively new, but it has the ability to raise self-awareness and allow you to see yourself in a different perspective. And we've done some minor things in Barnstead in that way, but we saw its potential. We've done some work on zones of regulation and students being able to realize what state of anxiety or level they're in, develop strategies to be able to, that were individual to them, that would allow them to de-escalate, whether it was a routine where they would do a cue that would let the teacher know that they needed to take a break from the classroom. So I think it's several things, but the whole building.
I'm sorry, your time is up, sir. Sorry. And we are now moving, sorry, Sandy, next question, correct? Or
No,
Chris?
no, we're moving on to Mr. Kellen for the same question.
Sorry, my timer had me a little off balance.
That's okay. As we all have spoken about previously, social emotional learning is probably one of the most primary things that we need to focus on as we move forward this spring and then at the beginning of the next school year. Hopefully that's all in person. That's certainly what I know we're all hoping for to happen even sooner than the beginning of the next school year. It's really a matter of supporting the entire community, that the students, the staff, I know I talked about this before, the families, really having a deep understanding of what it is that everybody needs. And again, it's that flying that plane while we're building it. We, as Dr. Karkin was talking about, we're not going to have too much time to plan about it while it's happening. And we need to really, I think we've learned that from the pandemic, we really need to make decisions on our feet and quickly. Well, that's one of the things about social emotional learning and understanding how to support students. It's absolutely about those relationships. So we need to create the opportunities to support the relationships that happen between staff members, administration, students, families, all working together to support one another. There are a number of resources out there that are free or low cost that we can certainly utilize to support those things for everybody. However, we really need to create the opportunities for folks to build those relationships with our students and their families, and that starts with really developing that trust that I know exists. I can tell you, my kids have those trusted staff members that they go way above and beyond just the academic or the coaching or whatever it is that they're doing, that they form those relationships. They're mentors to them. So really identifying those connections, and for those that might not have those yet, we've got to figure out and create those opportunities for those connections to develop.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kellen. Our next question is a 4-minute question. Once again, this will go first to Dr. Cochran. The question is, as a 4-town regional district, how do we create consistency, especially when it comes to the areas of curriculum and assessment?
I think that comes from first structure, curriculum. I think we have a very strong history of curriculum development. And I think with respect to consistency, you're talking about essentially the elementary schools, because the middle and high school, of course, are all of the towns. And I think actually you do exactly what we have been doing. We bring teachers together, we talk about curriculum, we write curriculum, it evolves over time. And we have administrators. One of the things that I like to see moving forward is that administrators more in classrooms and working with teachers on teacher improvement. We do have some capacity and some history in that regard. And I think we've done it relatively well, but I think we can still show some improvement in that area. But I think it starts first with that values conversation. Curriculum derives from values, where we put our time, effort, and energy, and then consistency. For example, if we have a traditional educational approach where students walk in and we assume all students are in the same place and every student gets taught the same thing at the same time, we know that some student is bored silly and another kid is over their head. Where are we with respect to formative assessment? Where are we with respect to competency-based education and learning, which really uses the formative assessment to determine where the individual child is in the classroom at that point in time, and give them the challenge and the curriculum that they need at that point in time along a learning progression, as opposed to teaching everybody the same. So that's one of the things that consistency brings. So it's looking at consistency in terms of what the expectations are, where we want students to go, but inconsistently, because we know that within a classroom of students, you have a tremendous range. We have kids who are soaring, and we have kids who need catch-up growth to get them up to grade level. And so developing a process that does that is paramount. I think we're in a good place. I think we do a lot of things very well. And I think the notion of years growth for years instruction for all students and catch-up growth for those who need it is the sort of mantra that we have to have, that says we meet kids where they are, we take them from where they are to that next place, we try to develop independence, we try to develop an intellectual atmosphere, we try to get kids who own their own learning and who are good at reflecting on their own learning and start to do some of their own self-assessment. So I see good chunks of that in a lot of classes. And I have been able to get in some classes this year, despite COVID and all the other things going on in the district. But I see some really great stuff. What I don't see is a level of consistency and systemization of some of those finer aspects. I see people working hard, doing some great things, but in that aspect at the elementary level, we need that consistency. And to me, that comes from district leadership. In this case, we have a director of curriculum for elementary, one for secondary, and your position, Sandy. And so in this case, most of that work would fall to Lucy Canotis. And so what I've seen is that we're working very hard in that regard. Signing off.
Dr. Cochran, if you'd like to finish, you have 30 seconds left.
Just that I think we have to take a look at how we do that. We have to develop administrators who are educational leaders. I think we don't have a consistent model of what we look for in building administration, and I think that's a mistake, and I think it's something we need to address moving forward so we have consistency. I believe building administration needs to be educational and instructional leaders, and I believe it very strongly.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen, same question, please.
So curriculum is essentially, it's a guide, right? It's a central guide for what it is that we expect our students and staff to do with regard to teaching and learning. So you can have frameworks, you can buy programs. It really all needs to connect to the standards. We have the state gives us the standards that we need to ensure that our students are learning. And there are, over the years, there have been variations of what is expected of us and variations as to how that learning is assessed. It's important to have those frameworks. It's important to have professional learning as an extensive part of being able to support our teachers, our related service providers, our paraprofessionals in their understanding of what's expected, that they are teaching our students and our students are learning. Having that central guide is obviously, very essential. With respect to consistency, we need to have those consistent resources available. I think where I differ a little bit from what Dr. Cochran was talking about was, not that I disagree with regard to consistency being important, it is very important, but I also believe in not only the science of teaching, but the art of teaching. If anybody's ever spent time meeting with a group of teachers, talking about curriculum, you'd quickly realize that you could power a small town on their excitement. They get so into this, they're just so engaged in it. Because I wasn't a teacher, because my background is really in behavioral supports and counseling, I've learned a lot about teaching over the years, but it's just so impressive to me to work with a group of teachers when they're talking about curriculum, when they're talking about how they're going to be able to deliver it to students, when they're talking about that differentiation and coming up with ideas. How are we going to modify this curriculum for this student? How are we going to enhance the curriculum to stretch for this student or these students? How are we going to meet all of the individual students' needs and meet them collectively? It's truly amazing. So I really believe that we have to depend on our educators in helping us understand what are the essential features in delivering the curriculum. Again, we can buy programs, you can buy, have a central guide and a central framework, whether it's reading, writing workshop, whether it's 4 blocks, whatever the program is that we believe that really needs to be selected by the curriculum folks and the teachers, and then have all those supplemental programs to help support. And they can't be one and the same all the time for everybody. We really have to let folks really demonstrate their art with respect to providing instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Kellen. Mr. Duncan, same question, please.
Yeah, so this is not easy. What you're asking for is very difficult to do. It's absolutely essential that a district can show and practice that what happens in preschool directly impacts what happens upon graduation and beyond. And so in order to develop consistency throughout, you have to have a written curriculum. And the word curriculum has so many meanings, but I think the one we're really talking about is standards related curriculum where we develop learning progressions that we all agree upon from kindergarten, preschool, kindergarten, all the way through in all subject areas, graduation. And then the subject of competency within that is also a conversation, because not all those learning progressions tend to necessarily be areas that you would say the students need to be completely competent in. But whether it be competency or progressions, you also, when building them and building curriculum in general, especially now in a 21st century, it's more about making certain that you not only have your content, but you have your complex reasoning. And we've talked with different words here tonight. Every single one of us has talked about something similar, but the habits of mind, which goes along with the social emotional things, have to work together in order to really make certain that our learners are getting the the instruction that they need in order to gain that competency. Now, that's all well and good to develop that. It takes time, it takes organization. So the curriculum leaders in the district and in the schools will need to get together to map that out, basically. But also to talk about, all right, if this is what we want as an end result, to make sure that we have, and it's not by all means not an end result, but at least to have a curriculum that's a starting point. You need to say, all right, what are the barriers that are getting in the way of that? And some of the barriers, I'm going to guess, would be just professional development. You desperately want teachers to develop the curriculum. You want them to work together to develop the progressions all the way through, but they have to know how to develop the progressions. And so they need to be, there needs to be professional development, very purposeful, intentional professional development on Marzano's work. It's not real exciting, but he is the lead educator, or I should say the lead person for research in the field. We need to at least maybe water down some of Hattie's work and make sure that that is part of our professional development on habits of mind. And I think significantly, because when you're building the progressions and the scales that go along with that, people have to understand what complex reasoning means. That's not easy to understand. So there's a ton of professional development that has to go on before and during and ongoing all the way through. And then, as others have stated, there needs to be a system of then monitoring that and supporting, which is done with administration and other teachers who are teacher leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Our next question is a 2-minute question. It's a bit shorter, and we'll direct this first to Mr. Kellen. The question is, how do you engage in open communication with various stakeholder groups in the community?
Always be available to them. So somebody calls, you return their call, within 24 hours, but really mostly that day or night if possible. That's something I've always done. I give out my cell phone number, make myself available to folks, as far as being available for that communication. But for a whole school district, communication's multifaceted. We have so many tools available to us with respect to social media, with regard to, the alerts that we have, well, we still do it, but not so much, sending those notices home with kids in their backpacks that you may or may not ever see, depending on whether or not you've gone into their backpack. So, we send emails, we send texts, we send voice alerts, we send voice messages, we use social media. All of that communication is readily available to us. Making it meaningful is really the key. I know when we first started using an alert system many years ago, we did so. It's going to be for school cancellations and for emergencies. And quickly the principals started using it for everything. And we said, okay, wait a minute, we have to back off on that, because I'm no longer listening to the message. And you have the data that you can see whether or not people are answering the phone or listening to the message, and whether or not, Oftentimes they return the call, right, to the number that comes up, and it's not necessarily a real number. So communication has to be meaningful. We have to make sure that, the method in which we use it is an appropriate method and it's efficient and effective.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kellen. Mr. Duncan, same question, please.
So engaging with different stakeholders, again, another really difficult task because the different groups communicate and receive communication differently from one another. So if I were to talk about parents, first and foremost, I think that it's important that they know that the superintendent is there for their students. And so if their students see the superintendent and see other leaders in their school on a regular basis and know who they are, that gets talked about at home. And that forms a foundation for communication with parents. I think that various groups like Rotary or, other police, fire, making certain that there's continuous communication. If you're invited to speak, you go and speak. If you're asked to be part of something, to give a perspective on something, whether it be a committee, so as long as it's not pulling away from the work that you're doing for the district, you join those committees because relationship building is important. The idea we've talked about already of making certain that we're out in the community and having very set times to communicate and to listen back and forth with family members in the town that they are in. So for instance, I'm not making people from Atkinson travel to my office area. Like that's rude. I need to go there and meet with them. It's easier for me to travel than it is for a bunch of other individuals to travel the other day. Plus it sends a message that, it's at my time, it's important for me to come out to you. So then it was mentioned before, all calls and things of that nature. You can do it through a digital voice or you can do it through your normal voice. I think that was really, that's important to do. And then also I found, I'll just end with this, the last thing that I found was really beneficial was I do a State of the District address to the community. In person wasn't the best. You didn't get a lot of people, but doing smaller recordings, videos that you can post that they're able to view, and you get a lot more viewership that way. And that's a good way to communicate, and people are in the know.
Great, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Dr. Cochran, if you could answer the same question, please.
Brian, you're on mute. Dr. Cochran.
Not anymore.
There we go.
You talked about open communication, and I think open communication itself has a couple of attributes. One is that you're communicating consistently and accurately and openly. Two, I think it implies that it's two-way. And listening is such an important part. Turning around comments. If you in the hecticness of a busy day, you have a concern from a parent about how fully remote learning is going, and they have questions or concerns. If you can't get immediately back to them, let them know that you've heard them. Reach out, let them know that you get back to them. And I think that level of listening and that level of getting back to people and making sure they feel heard is important. I think that two-way piece means a lot. It often means that you're responding to queries and questions that you may not be all that especially happy about, because often those comes, as I say, from concerns. But I think it's important that people realize that you're going to engage with them, that you're going to listen to what they have, ask questions to make sure you get clarification about what their concern is, so that you can know that you can address it at some level. There are times that you'll have to tell parents that that's unfortunately the way we do it, and this is why we do it. And there's sometimes we may have to disagree or agree to disagree about that, but you have to be honest, you have to be upfront, and you can't dodge the difficult questions. That's one of the things that parents and community members really don't relate to, and I don't blame them. You can't dodge the difficult questions. You have to be honest and empathetic and straightforward with people.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cochran. Our next question is a 4-minute question, and we'll direct it first to Mr. Duncan. The question is, please provide an example of how you have used innovative, creative, or out-of-the-box thinking to implement change. And then if you could also follow up and share what were the results.
So I have several examples, but one that is, I can do it in 4 minutes and be very concrete with, is when I was a principal of the Marlborough School, a K-8 school in southwest part of the state here near Keene. We had a goal as a school to focus on personalizing learning, which involves personalized learning plans, advisories and so forth, things of that nature, working with social, emotional, academic, all of that. And we also wanted to make certain that by personalizing, we were getting more support for our teachers, for our students during that time frame. So my first year there, we had a lot, I don't know, like a dozen Keene State student teachers there. And I found through just observation that some of this was working really well and a lot of it was not working well. And that when they left, there was damage that was done. So I went to the college and gave them a proposal. And the proposal was that I wanted to build with them a 3-year residency program that when their students become sophomores, those who wanted to join this kind of pathway would spend 3 years in my school. 3 years, so their courses were actually held at my school. The professors from Keene State came to my school, and that it was a appropriate blended learning approach where they did some of their in-class instruction by using one of our classes, but then were able to go out into the school and do their observations and then start supporting. Now, to speed this innovation up, it worked out beautifully, and it significantly enhanced the environment and a lot of the learning opportunities for our students. When it was assessed by an outside organization, it was shown that there was some growth in our students' math and ELA results. That's what they looked at. When NCATE came for the accreditation of the college program, they cited it as the best program that they had seen across the nation. So it lasted several years past my time there because of other factors. It has not continued on. A lot of it has to do with just the number of people going into Keene State for teaching in general. But it was for that time frame, and it was quite impressive. And the immediate data of teachers and getting their jobs and so forth was on the Keene State side was very high.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Cochran, same question, please.
Brian, I got it. Okay.
Sorry. The example that I'm going to use is fairly routine now, but it wasn't when I began, and that is the notion of sharing student growth data with teachers and teacher teams to look at where we're getting a year's growth for year's instruction and where we're not. And developing the data protocols, almost every district that I've been in has never had data protocols. They never knew how to look at student data, whether it be achievement data or growth data. And so being able to offer that to them, and knowing at the same time that teachers would be a little reluctant to determine, in fact, whether or not students were getting a year's growth for year's instruction. And so in Nashua, in Litchfield, and in Barnstead, we've done that. We've offered to share teacher level data or grade level data that looks at whether or not students are getting the growth that they should and whether we're getting catch-up growth in those students who need it. And that was innovative. It was a little controversial because it was very personal. And so we had to do this in ways that were appropriate and acceptable for the teacher. Some people have a higher level of tolerance of saying, I really need to know this, and others are very reluctant to. And so that was out of the box at the time when I started, which was many, many years ago. And it became commonplace in my districts over time. People began to see it as a valuable and useful tool. At the same point in time, you have people who are rather reluctant. And so trying to make this part of the norm of what we do, that we owe it to the students to look and see where we're getting, growth and where we're not. How's our tier 1 instruction, regular classroom instruction? How's our tier 2 instruction, tier 3 instruction? Are we getting true growth and catch-up growth from our reading teachers, from our math interventionists, and so on? What about special education? And so that at a certain point in time, and still in many places, would be relatively revolutionary. Because most people still don't have access to the data about how their students are growing, although I think it's becoming much more prevalent within the community. But that would be one of the examples that I've done in multiple places with huge success and huge resulting student growth.
Thank you, Dr. Cochran. And Mr. Kellen, we'll ask you the same question, please.
Program development has been a big part of how I've implemented change over the course of my entire career. The superintendent that hired me actually said, what would you do differently? And again, I was only 27 years old. His first question was, why do you think you're qualified to do this job? I said, I'm not. You made me come in for an interview. So one of the things I remember talking about with him was around program development. Really looking and saying, wait a minute, we're having students go to out-of-district placements. Back then, preschool actually. Preschool was in the community area, preschools and kindergartens, and we were paying a tuition for each student, and we were sending speech language pathologists and teachers into those, on a schedule across the day. And I was doing some data analysis on it, saying, I have each speech and language pathologist is spending 7 hours a day, 7 hours a week traveling. Well, anybody who knows anything about the cost of speech and language pathologists or any related services know that that is a poor return on investment, that's for sure. So over the course of my career, I started the Derry Early Education Program, and I'll say it was my vision, working with a huge group of folks, to start an integrated preschool program back in 2006, I believe it was. We're one of the first integrated preschool programs in the state, where parents could tuition in the non-identified, or they call them typical peers, and that gave the opportunity for our students who were identified to participate with non-disabled peers in an integrated setting, and those revenues helped to offset and defray the costs to some degree. Those special ed programs I talked about, starting a program for students with multiple handicapping conditions, starting the NECC program, the program that I started in for students with emotional disturbance, really working to expand that. But really taking those opportunities to create something that moves people forward, that brings people outside the box, looks at things differently. I know some of the conversation around privatization of schools and things like that. I think that's more or less what we're really talking about is, how do you do things differently? How do you create those opportunities for people to do things differently that students are going to derive a greater benefit? One of the other more recent things was Blizzard bags. A couple of years ago, I became the person in charge of Blizzard bags. And I just, one of the big things, and actually our union president who used to work in the computer field, she and I really worked well together with a whole group, a committee, and really pushed forward on, I was calling it real time online learning then, but it built the foundation. So we got many of our staff were very invested in that process. And so we were using Google Classroom a couple of years ago, and we were growing that capacity to all of the other folks in the district. And some folks were using Zoom or Google Meet at the time. So, fortunately, we're a little bit ahead of the curve as we came into this. In fact, we looked at Timberlane and Hampstead's Blizzard bag stuff as we were developing our own. So it's taking that time to, look at things differently and figure out how we can benefit from it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Cohen. That actually concludes our formal question period of the forum, but we would like to conclude by providing you each 2 minutes to share any additional information that you would like to share with our community relative to your experience or your candidacy for this position. And so following our rotation, we are back to Dr. Cochran to start us off. So Dr. Cochran, you have 2 minutes to close up the evening for yourself.
I've been blessed. You know, when I started teaching way back in the day, I loved teaching and coaching and doing all the things that I did. And I was concerned I didn't know enough about curriculum and instruction. And so I did master's degrees in curriculum and administration and moved forward. I've just been fortunate to have so many opportunities to do so many things as it relates to educational change and improvement. What I really would look forward to is being able to bring that to Timberlane for an extended period of time. I think we have fantastic people. I think our district administration is in good shape, tremendous leadership. We have some work to do in some other areas, but I think all the building blocks are there. And I believe I've demonstrated in many of my previous stops along the way that I've been able to work with school boards, able to work with community, teachers unions, teachers, and district and building administration to maximize learning and really establish a climate and culture that is student-centric and learning-centric. I see it in the classrooms that I'm in regularly. I think we need to look at consistency, and I think we need to look at elevating our game in terms of how we're looking at competencies and competency-based, and especially in doing it in a way that uses formative assessments more and more individualization. Although I have to say, there are a lot of people in this district who are well on that path and are doing a phenomenal job. But that, I think, is you know, the areas that I think I've demonstrated excellence across my career. The depth and breadth of my background in that core area, the ability to support building administration, district administration, and schools in that area has been demonstrated time after time after time. And I'd be thrilled to be able to continue to do it here in Timberlane.
Thank you, Dr. Cochran. Mr. Kellen, you have 2 minutes to close out.
Sure. I have extensive knowledge and experience in all areas of school district administration, but what I'm most interested in is leadership. I'd really like to work with Timberlane to build the capacity of leadership, because leadership isn't just at the top. Leadership is throughout the organization. Leadership is our administrators, our teachers, our students, community leaders, family leaders. You know, it's those parents that are involved in all kinds of activities that do so much to support our schools. I want to be part of that. As I said before, you know, as a parent, I'm a part of the education community. I want to be a complete part of the fabric of the education community by being the leader of this school district and being available to the entire community by, you know, expanding on those relationships that I have and developing new relationships, doing so through just honest, hard work, and, you know, sharing those perspectives, sharing my values and beliefs, and learning the values and beliefs of others, and finding where we all line up, creating a direction, and committing to doing that work. As I said, you know, as a Timberlane family, we realize, and I say we because we realize, if I were fortunate enough to get this position, it's a full Kellen family investment in this school district, and that's something we're all looking forward to.
Thank you, Mr. Kellen. And Mr. Duncan, you have 2 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a student-centered collaborative leader, and I am excited to take the next step in getting to know the students here, the faculty, the community. And I have a lot of experience with successfully bringing people together, and not always people who have previously worked well with one another. We all have common ground, and finding that common ground is sometimes difficult, but because the students are the center, the most important thing, our focus. I know that we can work together as a district to improve what already is a great district, and to make certain, judging by some of the questions that were asked tonight, that we develop that continuity from when that 4-year-old enters the classroom to when that 18-year-old graduates, and that he or she knows exactly what that she, well, at least knows that she has the ability to do whatever he or she wants to do, whether it be college, career, or both.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Before handing this over to Kristen to kind of close out the evening, on behalf of Kristen and our entire search committee, I want to thank the three of you. This was quite a process that you have gone through. We're so appreciative that you took the time to think thoughtfully about your responses to questions that came from our community members. Thank you for being here tonight. Going through this process remotely on Zoom is a new experience for all of us. And so we thank you for your flexibility. And again, it's been a pleasure to hear all of you speak and share your experience and knowledge with regard to your positions in leadership. And I'm going to hand this over to Kristen, who's going to share some next steps with you and with our community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for a great job tonight with the questions. I'd also like to thank you for being my vice chair throughout the process, and a special thank you to all the other committee members who served to get us to this point with 3 very qualified candidates. A reminder to the public that we are accepting public comments about this forum until 11 o'clock tonight. The link for this is on the homepage of the district website, which is timberlane.net. And these comments will be reviewed by the school board prior to final actions in the search process. The school board will be having a previously noticed non-public meeting tomorrow in order to have subsequent interviews with each of the candidates and to begin discussions concerning our final decision. That being said, I want to close by thanking all the candidates again for participating tonight and for their interest in Timberlane. You will all be provided a link for your scheduled interview tomorrow morning. If you do not have that link by noontime tomorrow, please reach out to Sandy Allaire and she will ensure that you do get the link. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow night with the Timberlane School Board. So thank you very much and have a great night.
Thank you. Good opportunity.
Thanks, guys.
Meet you, Ruben, Chris.
Thank you. And great to meet you guys too.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.